Hey. So I can't get my hand in there. Finger width in the rear arch. Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how to fit ball joint drop spindles to a 66 and later VW Bug. This isn't going to be a short video because it shows you all the tips and tricks that I've picked up in like 25 years of lowering Volkswagens. So if you want a comprehensive guide of how to fit drop spindles, watch the rest of the video. I'll see you at the end. Here's the candidate. This is my 68 sunroof Beetle. As you can see, the stance at the minute is whack because I fitted the sprint stars before I lowered it. We're going to address this today. So I can't get my hand in there, and fit these drop spindles, get it looking cool, and then once the drop spindles are on, I can give the back a little bit of a tickle. So these are the EMPI Zero Offset drop spindles. And what's the big deal between these and a normal drop spindle, I hear you ask? Well, basically, a normal drop spindle, you can see here why it's a drop spindle, because this bit is a lot higher in relation to the stub axle. But the normal drop spindles that have always been available widen the track by around 5/8 of an inch each side. So you know, in like metric terms, that's 3/4 of an inch basically. So it sticks your wheels out, even if you're running standard wheels, which I'm going to run original sprint stars, original steel sprint stars with these. But even if you're running a standard wheel, which the steel sprint star has a similar offset to a standard wheel, it pushes the wheels out. And if you're in the know, you can always spot a car with standard drop spindles. You basically just sticks the wheels out, and this is one of the reasons why 2-inch narrow beams have become really popular. But obviously when you start getting into fitting a 2-inch narrow beam, you've got to buy the beam, you've got to buy the narrow torsion leaves, you've got to narrow the track rods, you've got to get someone to do the job. And if you're not actually that experienced, it feels like quite a big job to do. Whereas bolting a set of spindles on is pretty easy, and we're going to cover that later on in the video. But the beauty of the zero offset spindle is you don't need a narrow beam. It's kind of the same as back in the old days, welding in some sway away adjusters or some Avis adjusters into the beam, and lowering it just on the beam itself. But yeah, basically you don't have to do that anymore, and lowering it on adjusters on the beam was always going to give you poorer ride quality, whereas the beauty of drop spindles is they give you standard ride quality. So the whole reason I decided to lower my Beetle and put the sprint stars on it was because these EMPI drop spindles, these zero offset drop spindles, are now available, because I didn't want to fit a narrow beam to it. I just wanted a mild, these drop at 2.5 inches, so I just wanted a mild drop. And yeah, so we're gonna get some paint on these and see how we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is get some paint. Get some paint on the spindles, because obviously in the UK especially, and a lot of other climates, they're going to rust in 2 minutes flat. So before I do that, they sort of come from wherever they came from. These came from Just Campers in the UK, because not many people do the zero offset ones. You can see they come with some sort of like a wax or grease coating. So before I even start to prep them, I'm just gonna take some panel degreaser, and give them a bit of a wipe down. Now, before we get some paint on them, you can probably see that's quite shiny, whereas this one I've already been over and it's keyed up. So what I'm using for this is a grey Scotch-Brite pad. You can use red Scotch-Brite pad if you want. This is just what I had to hand. And basically what you're aiming to do is just keel the surface enough so that the primer and the paint sticks to it. Well, we're not going to paint the actual stub axle, so you don't need to worry about that, but we are going to paint the rest of the spindle. We're going to paint all this as well. Once they're all keyed up, as these are, we're going to panel wipe it again. So as you can see, I've got them masked up. Now masked around where the grease seal goes. Just a bit of a word on paint. I'm going to use an epoxy primer that's good. It's got a good etch in it. You really need a primer with a good etch. But also I'm going to use 2K, so you can get your aerosols mixed into 2K. They add an activator to the paint, so you've got a shorter working time than you would have with just like a single stage paint. The reason I'm using 2K is it's a lot more durable, but also it's great if you want a high gloss finish. I don't know whether some of you might have noticed, but if you use the standard gloss black aerosols that you get from a Motor Factors or anywhere like that, they never dry gloss, they never dry shiny. The thing is with any paint really, you need a good mask with filters in it, but with 2K especially. So that's what we're going to be using. That's one coat on one side. Obviously quite lucky with the sun here, so it's going to dry them really quickly. So we'll wait for them to dry, check the coverage, and then turn them over and do the other side. The primer's dry on one side. Got a really good even coverage. Don't need to get loads on. Just make sure it's covered. Now to get some on the other side. Now you can see everything's dry. Left out in the sun for quite a while. You want the primer to be completely dry before you carry on, otherwise you're going to cause problems with the paint later. So now I'm going to break out the 2K black. And with this, it's a bit of a skill to get enough on so that it's got a gloss, but not too much so that it runs or sags. Probably notice that I'm not just holding the nozzle down completely, I'm just pulsing it with my finger. So as you can see, left them for a couple of hours so far, just so that they dry off. So I'm not turning them over and then they like stick into the masking paper. Still worth just putting them down with the least amount of touch points on the paper just to paint them. What I'm going to do is paint them, because I've not left them overnight to cure. I'm going to get the coat on the back, and then once I'm happy I'm going to take them off the paper and put them on something like concrete, just so that they don't stick to anything, just in case. So here we go, there's the paint, quick shake, mask on as always. Nice and windy. always gets windy as soon as you start painting. The beauty of this 2K stuff is that it's a lot thicker than the single stage as well, so it tends to need less coats. As you can see, I didn't put a particularly heavy coat on, but it's come out really well, come out really shiny. Here's the finished drop spindles painted. Came out pretty well, to be fair, for a backyard paint job. wouldn't say they're show quality at all, but the 2K paint is really makes a massive difference. So that's upside down, so it's going to sit on the car. So let's get the car jacked up, get it secured on these stands, and crack on. It was at this point that I realised my breaker bar got broken and not replaced, so here we are trying to loosen the wheel bolts. Don't try this at home, kids. Fuck me. So you can probably see here, got a couple of axle stands. I've put this 18mm ply down because of the gravel on the drive. Jacked up on the centre of the beam, and now I'm going to drop it down, make sure it's secure before I get underneath it. The wheels. So at this point you realise that I've got drum brakes and I've got drum brake spindles. Why am I not upgrading to discs? A couple of reasons really. This car is an all original car, obviously I'm lowering it now. But it's I've always had the drums on it. They've always been adjusted pretty well. You can see on the drums where I used to have it drilled for Porsche pattern when I had cosmic wheels on it. But the other thing is I'm running 145 tyres up front, and if you the better the brakes, the better the tyre needs to be. I don't want to put disc brakes on and then just be locking it up all the time. Drum brakes with a stock engine, this is stock 1300, perfectly adequate, and if they're adjusted well, which I'll adjust them when I put it all back together. So that's my take on why I'm just sticking with the drums. First step is to get the grease cap off. On the other side, you'll need to get rid of the E-clip and pull out the speedo cable as well. I probably should have videoed that side already, but here we go. It's all been fairly recently greased and packed, but it's a good opportunity to repack and check the wheel bearings as well. So what I'm going to do, get a piece of rag, just clean all the grease off. Clarify, this is for ball joint cars, so if you've got a Lincoln car which is pre-66, it's an entirely different procedure. So what you'll see here is you've got an Allen key on the end there, a little Allen key in there, so we need to loosen that Allen key off. Got the right size Allen key. Now a little word on these, the Allen key, these little bolts, the little pinch bolts, are just regular threads both sides, so lefty loosey. But on these spindle nuts, one is left hand thread and one is a right hand thread. So this is a regular thread, but on the other side it will be a left hand thread. So you basically just put these off. If your drums weren't very well adjusted, you could just pull those off. Kind of hard to see, but you can see this is my brake adjusting tool. Hello, got my glasses on, that I made just with an old screwdriver, and here when it focuses in with the holes, inside those holes are some star adjusters. For now, basically just backing them off so that we can get the drum off. Now if you're lucky and your car is well maintained, or you just get lucky, then they will come undone. If not, you might need to either use a puller or one trick that I've used in the past. It's a bit of a last resort because it can knacker up your brake shoes and your brake springs, but you can basically get an M14 fine bolt through here, an old track rod end where the track rod end actually inserts into the tie rod. That's the same M14 by 1.5 thread as the late wheel bolts, and so you can basically wind one of those in, or two of those in, and use them as a little bit of a puller to help draw the drum off. So here's the drum ready to come off. Just keep the wheel bearing in there for now. Set that aside. Just give this a wipe off just so it doesn't get everywhere. What we're going to be doing is inspecting our wheel bearings as well before we put it all back together, because if you have got a problem with the wheel bearing, you don't want us to damage the new stub axle on the new spindle. So I don't know whether you can see this. Here's your star adjusters on the brakes. So obviously it's a bit counterintuitive, because these, you have to turn these one way for this to either unwind or wind back in. And I've been doing it 30 years and I still have to use my fingers to figure out how to do it. So you're probably not alone, or maybe it's just me. Next step is to get these off. Obviously if you've got disc brakes, it's an entirely different procedure. There are special tools for this. I just use pliers. It's not very difficult. Quite often the original ones, the original springs are a lot stronger than the aftermarket springs, if you're using aftermarket springs. Sometimes even with original springs you can just use your fingers, push it in, turn it. Not going to work today obviously. What I'm doing is I'm holding the pin on the back with my finger as I'm doing it. Push that in, turn it. Keep your mouth closed as you do this, because obviously it pings off. Take the tooth out. And then we're just going to pull the shoes off the drum and the cylinder, keep them like that. Plenty of life left in them. I'm going to set them aside. And then you've got these 3 bolts. Again, different on a disc brake setup. This is a 15, I believe. We're just going to quickly loosen these off. I'll fast forward this bit. Now we're just going to put this out of the way. There we go. Yeah, there it is. Obviously there you've got your stock spindle, and this is your drop spindle, so you can kind of see the difference there. That's where this bolts on, and this is where this sits. Bit of a genius bit of kit really. So first thing I'm going to do is crack this track rod end off. That is a 19. Really strong, isn't it? Something that sometimes happens with these, if they're not in the taper properly, they could start to spin, and that's a real pain in the arse if they do that. You've got some grips like this, some really good mole grips. Quite often you can sort of, these would adjust so that they basically hold the track rod into the taper, so you can undo it. Failing that, sometimes if you tap the top with a hammer, it reseats it into the taper. Luckily these aren't doing that. It can do it worse actually when you're trying to do them up. Really lock the threads on these ones for some reason. What you will get is, if your car's not been worked on before, if it's a really original car, this won't be a nylock, it'll be a castellated nut with a split pin. So you'll need to pull the split pin out. More often than not, the split pins just snap. And if the split pin does just snap, the split pins are so little that you can actually just take the nut off and then tap or drill it out later. So quite often you get away with just tapping it out with a punch. Get that one off. And now, there are several ways to get this off, and some people, check the boots are alright. Some people swear by just using a hammer, obviously a bigger hammer than this little toffee hammer here. Smack it straight on there. That can actually unseat the bead, unseat the taper. Don't start whacking this, If the worst comes to the worst, and you do feel like you're going to have to start pounding this out, at least put the nut back on, and be prepared that you're actually going to need to replace the track rod end if you do that. There's also a ball joint splitter that this one's like I guess a lot of people call it like the deluxe version, and it's adjustable. This is the one that I always use, but there is another one that's just like a fork with a thing that you whack with a hammer. I always just find them a bit brutal, really. So I'm just gonna stick with this one. Now what I'm gonna do actually before I do this is I'm just gonna put the nut back on a few turns, because I don't want to mushroom over the threads. Put it back on a few turns, it just means you're less likely to damage any of the threads. Yeah, basically just, hopefully you can see that really well. Get that in there really well. And this is a 24mm. I want to use a socket for this, but I've just got a spanner to hand. It goes without saying, well maybe it doesn't go without saying, because I've got plenty of bruises in the past to show for it. Make sure you just keep your limbs and knees and everything out of the way from underneath here while you're doing it. Just get that set up a bit better. Because when this goes, it goes, and this is pretty heavy, and until you learn from bruises, it drops, and yeah, that's shit up basically. So keep your fingers out of the way as well as you're doing it. Goes. Hopefully now I can get this off. There we go. Got some experience to this, but actually just got lucky. Right, so that's that out of the way. Now if I spin this around, you can see there's two 19mm nuts, and then you've got this here, which is your camber adjuster, which actually looks like it's on the wrong way around. So 19mm spanner. Ring spanner is actually better than what I've got here, and yeah, just. You just saw that, but that taper just let go, which is a good thing, as long as it doesn't just get a bit of WD-40. I should have done that before. I've got a ring spanner. What I've done is spun the spindle the other way around, just resting on the shock there. Don't want to go too crazy with it, but there we go. Just helps it to come undone. Right, luckily here, this all seems like it's loose, so as I'm doing this, you can see this gap starting to open up here. And got the bottom nut off. Top one's got a bigger thrust washer than the bottom one. So I'll show you in a minute to get this one off. Thrust washer out of the way. So that's the bottom thrust washer, and that's the top one. Obviously need to make sure you get them back in the right order. And then this, I'm going to use this, hopefully be enough. Maybe not. Try and get this spindle off and get the other one back on. There we go. And that's the old one off. Could try and sell it, but not very valuable. just check all these are alright. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to put any copper grease or lube or anything on this because it needs holding the taper, but on this top, on this camber adjuster, which needs to sort of stay free. Copper grease on there. Not too much, go crazy. Obviously at this point, check your ball joints for play, and if you need to replace any of the boots, now's the time to do it as well. Yeah, alright, yeah, they'll go for a while. They're not that old, I don't believe. Right, so drop this one onto there. What's probably worth doing is getting the nut started on the bottom one. Obviously, washers have a certain way around to be used. The slight chamfered edge always goes against the nut. Use the same nut that came off onto the same thread, because you never know the difference between certain ball joint suppliers. Sometimes they use different threads. It just makes life easier. Just stick with the same nut. Right, I'm going to try and lift this back up. Get the spindle back in. In, thrust washer back on, hold that with your pinky, and then as tight as you can with your fingers, stop it from falling apart again, like that. Sometimes it might help to get a floor jack under this lower ball joint arm if you're struggling. Get it started. Let's get it on there now. A few turns into it. So it doesn't. Just trying to basically stop this camber nut taper from coming out again. Life a bit easier. You can see that that's going in. Just spin it around a little bit so I can get more access. So before we do the top one up, we're going to get the bottom one tight, and then I'll show you something that you need to be aware of in order to set up the camber on the top one. Nice and tight. So in here is this should basically move. This sets up the camber, so it's a 36mm. You can use grips. I've got a fancy old school Hazard spanner that I'm really proud of. So you've got part of the original sticker on, which I love. So basically, what you want to do is, before you tighten this up, you spin this around, and what you're looking for this notch. So I'll give it a little bit of a wipe. Maybe you can see there's a notch, and that notch basically should be at the front. So the tricky thing is that's basically what VW recommend as the starting point to set up the camber. So, you know, if everything's working well, everything's okay with the beam, then that should be the camber setup. So so what you need to do is get the wheels into a straight ahead position whilst keeping this notch at the front. So that's about straight ahead there. So you might want to basically hold, you know, you could get some like pipe grips or something like that if you don't have a 36mm spanner. How's it going? It's going all right. Keep this in the same place while we tighten this, which is a bit trickier, but let's see how it goes. And that's on there. So we just need to get this into the track rod into the taper. Little word about these. These are tapered the regular way up. Sometimes if you're going really slammed, what you might find is that this starts to catch here, and if your car's super slammed, which this one was never, to be fair, super slammed, but if it's pretty low, then you might need to reverse taper or put a reverse taper bush into the tie rod so that you can basically flip the tie rod upside down, so that, you know, the tie rod fits in from the bottom, and that just gives you a little bit more clearance of the wing. Just going to give this a little tap to seat it. Get the nut back on. Should probably move this back round. Hang on a sec. See all my house and everything. Hopefully you can see that. Start to see these back in. There's the ratchet. Okay, I didn't mess up the threads. Oh, right, I don't know whether you saw that, but this is starting to spin, so I'm going to get my little toffee hammer and see if that does the trick. That did the trick. If not, you could use the grips. Nice and tight. This is also a good time to just inspect in here, inspect your brake line under the, not brake line, fuel line under the tank. Just give it a good look over, see that everything looks okay. It's quite a good position to change that as well if it needs sorting. Right, so now we're in a position where we can put the brakes back on. We've got luckily some drop spindles, like the non-zero offset ones that I've fitted in the past. You've had to mess about getting the brakes to fit, especially sometimes with disc brakes. You haven't been able to run the dust shield and that sort of stuff. But I'm quite impressed really that EMPI have thought to put this cutout in for the brake hose. So this looks like it's just going to fit perfectly on there. Maybe it's not. Maybe I spoke too soon. Anyway, it fits perfect. That's good. So we can get that back into there. What I'm going to do before I do that is just put a little bit of copper grease on these bolts, just give them the best chance in the future. They're not going crazy. Obviously, if you went wild with the paint and put loads of coats on and then didn't tap out these threads, you might be in trouble now. But even if you did that and you don't own a tap, these are M10s. If you don't own a tap, you can generally get away with putting some grease, copper grease, or sometimes WD-40 onto a bolt, and then when you put the bolt in, you can put it in, one turn in, a couple of turns out, one turn in, one turn out. You know, just try and clean the threads as you go. You might have to take the bolt back out to blow the threads through. Luckily, we didn't put a load of paint on, so we're not in that position. So you've got all these nice snugged up with your fingers if you can. Hopefully they'll all go in. And it's quite a tiny breaker bar, really. Not going to go crazy. One thing to watch out for when you're doing anything that's going to move it to here, just be very careful. It's probably best to put it that way around. Just go around it all again and just check. At this point, it's probably a good idea to just prise these seals back as well on the wheel cylinders. If you are, just to double check, if you see any fluid leaking out here, then your wheel cylinders need replaced. One thing I'm going to do is take these out. These are your star adjusters. I'm going to take these out, give them a clean, and some more copper grease on them. What I'm actually going to do is take these all the way out. Clean everything, grease it, and put it back together. Because there's nothing worse than seized brake adjusters. Well, maybe some things, poverty and kind of stuff, but yeah, in terms of working on a Volkswagen, there's not a lot of things that suck more than finding your brake adjusters completely seized up. So we're going to just give these a bit of a coat of copper grease. Put them back together. Worth winding it all the way in, just check it's working alright. Then when you wind it all the way out, you can just wipe off the excess a little bit. Put some grease on here as well. Before you put it back in. Shouldn't be breathing brake dust really, but back in there. Wind that in a bit more. Do the same with this one. This lower pin in before you bolt this on, otherwise you'll have to take it apart again. Quickly do. It's just push it a bit first. Slip in there as well. Just a bit in there. Give the brake shoes a bit of a wipe off. up. And then push. Turn. Got it. This way. With the pin already. Not able to go back. Right. That's good. Let's go in. This is going to make the pin tricky because normally you can hold it at the back. So let's see how we get on with this. Try and use my fingers instead of pliers. Use the pliers. We've got a good grip. Try and see if we can get that hip. Put these on, will help. Keep your mouth closed again. Just luckily, I managed to get that in there. It looks like we could get into a situation where it's a bit tricky holding the pin, in which case you might have to get some long nose pliers or something. You can get down the back here, so yeah, don't forget this spring. That's again. All set up, just wiping the excess grease off anywhere to attract dust, and we're ready to put the drum back on. But before we do that, I'm gonna clean off and inspect the wheel bearings, because now's a good time to do it. Check that they feel okay. But the main thing to check, really, obviously make sure you keep everything completely scrupulously clean when you're doing this. The main thing to check is this race in here. So I'm going to wipe off the old grease. These weren't done that long ago, maybe about 8 or 9 months, so they shouldn't be too bad. But what I'll just show you in there, get that close. There you can see that race that the bearings sit into, so this surface here. Now, if this surface has any sort of marks on it, like quite often where the rollers are, if it's been sitting for a while, it'll have the witness marks of where the rollers are, and if that's rough and it's damaged the surface, then it needs to be changed. Same with the inner one. With the inner one, you just have to pop out this seal. I'll show you how to do that. Just be a bit careful with it. Should just pop out really easily. Again, just try to keep everything clean. Pull this one out and give everything a clean. I'll just do that. Put this on where I'm sitting. Clean it off. Check it feels smooth, which it does. Through there, and then I'm going to give this surface a clean out. And if the grease looks old or dirty, just give it a really good clean out. And yeah, that one looks good too, so we're good to go. So now I'm going to go get the other grease. So we've got the bearings packed back up with grease, put this back in. just use the palm of your hand to like palm the grease around the bearing if you're not completely packing it from scratch. Otherwise, if you do need to pack your bearings from scratch, there's probably plenty of other tutorials on YouTube for that. So that's the back bearing, and you get the front bearing. You also want to put some grease around the new stub axle as well before you put it all back together. So I'm just going to whip through this quickly. So that's all greased back up, all repacked, all put back together. I'm just going to pop the thrust washer on there. Used a grease with less than 5% moly in it. There's jury's out on moly grease in wheel bearings, but generally multi-purpose EP grease is better for VW wheel bearings. Just a quick word on the outer bearings as I start to bolt all this back together. Obviously when you do bolt it together, this is the surface that goes against the thrust washer. It looks a bit backwards, but that's just the way it goes. Obviously this one's the right hand threaded side. But yeah, the outer bearings, so basically most people think that wheel bearings change for the 68 model year, as in, you know, chunky bumpers and all that sort of stuff. But actually 68s had the early wheel bearings, so these all drop spindles are meant to take the late outer wheel bearing, so it changed for 69, just the outer one. So if you have a 68 or a 67 and 66, 67, and you're doing this job, you'll need to buy the late outer wheel bearing. Just rather tell you that than you get stuck with your car in the air and not able to fit it back together on the same day. So yeah, just make sure you've got the 69 onwards outer wheel bearing, and you'll be fine. So we're just going to snug this down. It's 24mm. We're just going to literally snug it down. We're not going to go tight, and then just back it off. And I'll just show you how I've always set up wheel bearings. You really don't want this to be too tight, because if it's too tight and this, the bearings will get hot, and I've heard extreme cases where the bearings get hot, this snaps off with the heat, and obviously dire consequences. So you do want a decent bit of just playing. So basically what I do is I use the edge of a flat screwdriver to just check that the thrust washer moves. Now that doesn't, so just go back and just knock it back a little bit. What we want to be seeing is a bit of movement in this thrust washer. Still too tight. Obviously you tighten it down a bit first because you need to seat it, and then just there you go. You can see probably see the wheel bearings, the thrust washer's moving as I'm so it is moving, but I'd rather it just had a little bit more movement, so just slacking it off a tiny bit more. I mean, generally you want to come back and check your wheel bearings after a little bit of driving anyway. That's moving, sort of. You don't want to be having to pry too hard against the side of the drum to get the thrust washer to move. If you are, then it's probably still too tight. I'm just going to back that off a tiny bit more. Again, it's crucial that you have some play in here, obviously not too much. I'm happy with that. It's moving quite freely, but not slopping around all over the place. Once you're happy with that, get this tightened up. Now it's just an M8 thread, so you really don't want to go crazy on this. I think it's something like 18 foot-pounds is the correct torque setting for M8, but that's just tighten it, but don't go crazy. What do I mean by don't go crazy? Just snug it up. That should be plenty. Then obviously you want to pack this with a bit more, pack this and the cap with some more grease, and then just knock the cap back on. You should just be able to, tap the edges around the cap as you do it. Don't go crazy and just flatten the cap with a big fucking hammer, whatever you do. So yeah, that's the next step. Here we go again with the toffee hammer. There we go. Noise changes when it's all the way on. And we're good to go. We're just going to put the wheel back on. As you can see, I've got a bit of... This is one of the only little bits of rust on this car, which I need to deal with in the next few weeks. I'm going to do it properly, unpick all this and do it like the factory intended, rather than putting those horrible panels on that just have a return and cover everything up. But yeah, apart from that, this is a really good car. All the original heater channels under there and floor pans are good. Anyway, back to this. So that's the wheel back on. And the final step is just to use my homemade tool to do the brake adjustment and then fit this little grommet to stop the water getting in. And then we're done with this step, at least anyway. Got to take it for a drive and then see what we're going to do with the back suspension. So just a quick word on this adjustment. What we've done is locked the wheel, and then we're going to back it off a little bit. So I've done the top one first, the leading shoe, so I'm just going to back that off a little bit. It was moving, and then just what we're aiming to do is just get a light drag on the wheel, so we're not aiming for a heavy drag, just a light drag, so we can still spin the wheel, but you can feel a little bit of a drag from the shoes. And that's once you're happy with that, I'll show you in a minute what I mean. So this is what we're aiming for, just a light drag on the wheel, a light on the brake shoes, and then we're good to go. That's the E-clip I was telling you about. Goes on there. This is the other side of the car, so we're just going to really put the E-clip somewhere safe and then push this through. And here's the cable, the back of the cable. Just going to pull the cable out, put it to one side, and then as you see on the corresponding drop spindle, there's a hole through the middle. Cable back in when you're done. As I said before as well, this side of the car, this is the off side of the car. It's got a left-hand thread on this. This here is a regular thread, but this is a left-hand thread, so righty-loosey rather than lefty-loosey. That's the only differences really on this side of the car. The speedo cable and the left-hand thread. Apart from that, it's exactly the same procedure. Just a final pearl of wisdom. You can see I've put the cable through, put the E-clip on before I've actually put this on, and then just tap it home gently. Otherwise you risk pushing this in when you've got the grease cap back on and having to take it all the way off again. So that's your final little tip. That's the second wheel back on. So now we're going to drop it on the ground, and then don't forget to tighten your wheel bolts when the car's on the ground. So here it is back on the ground, looking a lot better. I'm still not sure about the back, but I'm going to take it for a drive in a minute, put it on a flat surface and see how we're looking. Now that I've driven it and it's settled a little bit, I'm actually pretty happy with the stance as it is. Weirdly, when it was stock height, one side at the back seemed a little bit higher than the other, but now it seems good to go. So I'm just going to see the next few days what I think, but for now kind of looks like it's sorted, except for that towing eye that's hanging down off the bottom of the beam that I just caught 3 times, so that needs to come off. But yeah, apart from that, happy. So these wheels came to me for a decent price. I wanted 4.5s all around because I'm not really a big fan of the 5.5s at the back sticking out, and I wanted 80 profile tyres, like old school style. So I say old school as in, you know, back in the 80s when I first got into Volkswagens. So 165/80s on the back, 145/80s on the front, and the caps, the wheels didn't come with any caps, but luckily I managed to get a set of these really nice reproduction BBT stainless repro caps from Alex at Wolfsburg Restos. The wheels do need a little bit of touch up here and there, but they have been powder coated at some point, so I need to touch them up and paint the wheel bolts and just generally make them a bit nicer. But I'm not going to go to the whole rigmarole of getting them blasted and powder coated because they kind of suit the look of this car, you know. I mean, I'm going to do a little bit of work on these dents and things in the next week or two before Volksworld show, but they you know, the wheels in general really suit the look of the car. So one thing I didn't really like was the caps came, they're BBT caps, and they came with a BBT GT. It was like a gel sticker, so, you know, for me gel stickers are just way too modern for these cars. So luckily I managed to find these foil reproduction EMPI stickers, so I'm just going to stick them on now, and there you go. Hope you got a lot out of the video, and yeah, if you have and you've got this far, if you'd smash the like button, that would really mean a lot and makes a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more similar content. I'll be doing a how-to soon in the next couple of weeks. Second part to this one about lowering the back of your Beetle. So yeah, tune in for that. See you soon. Cheers.